Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Josh Heupel, this Tennessee program coming out of fall camp. Dill, let's look back over the last 3 to 4 weeks and kind of talk about some winners, some guys that really emerged for this Tennessee program as going to be difference makers in the 2024 season. Now, I think before we get into this conversation, we gotta clear one thing up, and that is the boys are massive Nico believers heading into 2024. There have been some Tennessee fans in the comments section saying that we're not giving enough love to Nico heading into 2024. That might be true. That being said, Dill, I don't think there's anybody higher on Nico heading into 2024 than yourself. I think the reason we're not talking as much about Nico is there's a lot of other aspects about this team that make us believers in Tennessee heading into 2024. And it's almost frustrating when you listen to some of the national media analysts and they talk about this Tennessee team and they act like Nico's the only reason to believe in this Tennessee program. We think Nico is going to be a great quarterback, but there's a lot of other aspects about this football program, specifically on the offensive line and guys in the front seven on the defense that have us believers in this Tennessee program. That's probably the answer to why we haven't talked as much about Nico as opposed to some other players on this roster. Wanted to clear that up. Really excited to get into this conversation now. Before we do, and as always, to the Tennessee fans, the amount of support y'all have shown the boys over the last couple of weeks, specifically the last couple of days, as we've talked this program on the recruiting trail, it's been absolutely amazing. We appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, without further ado, let's get into some of our winners, and let's start at the wide receiver position. We're going to start with Bru McCoy, but I want to talk about this overall wide receiver room. Not potentially. I think they're just going to take a massive step in the right direction in the 2024 year.
And it will be Bru McCoy. He'll be the engine for that kind of growth.
Yeah.
I think when you saw him on the field last year versus when after his injury, when you didn't see him on the field, there was a massive difference. I just think he's the one guy right now we know that when he needs to go create separation, go make a big play in traffic, do something impressive, he's going to be the one to do it. And that's not to say guys like Mikey Matthews or even a Chris Brazzell can't be that guy. But I think right now, when we're looking at proven talent on the boundary for Tennessee and a guy who can really open this offense up, create space for everyone else, allow a guy like Squirrel White to be much more effective than he was down the stretch for that Tennessee team in 2023, I think Bru McCoy's got to be that guy. And it sounds like in this fall camp, he's doing it. He's back to full health. He's back to what old Bru McCoy was. And that's going to be massive for this Tennessee program and also for Nico Iamaleava and him being really, really effective in his first year.
Talk about why is Bru McCoy a winner in fall camp? Just because he's back healthy. Like 100% Bru McCoy is a true wide receiver one in the SEC. And I think you made a really good point. When Bru McCoy went down with that injury in 2023, the wide receiver play for Tennessee was just not good enough. During that back half of the 2023 season, I thought that was one of the more underrated, less talked about conversations was, yes, Joe Milton struggled at the quarterback position. I didn't think the wide receivers were nearly good enough. Now you get Bru McCoy back to full health. You have a guy in Chris Brazzell coming in who I think we are very excited about being the wide receiver two in this offense. And then you sprinkle in guys like Chaz Nimrod, who seems to be having a phenomenal fall camp. That's a big body that goes 11 seconds in the 100-meter. Dante Thornton, another big body that can work vertically down the field. Mikey Matthews, Squirrel White. Now I suddenly look at this wide receiver room and say, hey, we got legitimate difference makers in this wide receiver room, kind of like we had in the 2022 season. I think that's another reason to really believe this Tennessee offense, kind of takes that step in 2024. You combine the wide receiver play with an upgrade at the quarterback play as well. I think this offense gets a lot better. Now, another position group that there seems to be a lot of buzz building within this Tennessee program, that's the tight end spot. This has never really been a position that Tennessee has seemed to get right under Josh Heupel yet. I think we are believers in this Tennessee program, specifically in the tight end position heading into 2024.
And it's a position that you feel like should be able to have a little bit more effectiveness and impact on this Tennessee program, given that they like to go to those wide splits and create a lot of space. I mean, a guy who can really work the middle of the field effectively, be a matchup nightmare for linebackers, and also kind of work off of play action and what they like to do running the ball, because obviously they're going to run the ball as well as anyone in the country, I think. I think you kind of are looking like who's going to be that NFL tight end emerging from Tennessee. And Ethan Davis is arguably the first guy who really has all the characteristics that you're looking for those really dynamic tight ends, because they've had good, solid blocking tight ends in the past. They haven't had a guy who has the athletic profile of
Yeah, you said it. You look at this Tennessee offense and just think it is begging for an elite tight end to work that middle of the field. When you play those wide splits, you force those safeties to kind of play towards that boundary. There is so much real estate in the middle of that field, just kind of begging for a big body tight end to work those seam routes, to work the middle of the field. Now, why I went with Ethan Davis, and I think it's worth kind of mentioning, there are 3 tight ends in that room that Tennessee is very excited about. I think all 3 play a lot. I think Ethan Davis is probably the most gifted pass-catching tight end Tennessee has had under Josh Heupel. You go back to Ethan Davis coming out of high school in 2023, this kid was arguably a better basketball player than he was a football player. And that's saying a lot because he was a damn good prospect on the football field as well, but had never really played inline tight end. And so there was a question mark and kind of a understanding that Ethan Davis was probably not going to be a year 1 guy. He had to add a little bit more weight, show that he could get it done in the run blocking department. You look up and say 6'5", 245 pounds. He looks physically ready to play in the SEC. You add that basketball background, you dive back into the high school film and say this kid moves like a wide receiver. I think he is the most gifted tight end, a pass-catching tight end that Tennessee has had.
He'll have to earn a spot because Holden Stays is no joke. I thought Holden Stays was really, really solid. Certainly doesn't have the upside that I think Ethan Davis has, but you kind of know what you're going to get with Holden Stays. It's a very dynamic, just all-around solid tight end. Again, probably not the same threat in the passing game that Ethan Davis would be if Ethan Davis kind of maxes out, if you will. But Holden Stays is going to be really solid. He's going to play a whole lot. I think you do kind of have a tight end room that you can be more excited about than any tight end room in this Tennessee.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you just feel really good that the tight end play is going to be better heading into 2024. Now, moving over to the defensive side of the football, Dill, I'll just kind of give you the T-box here. This is a guy you really just have been banging on the table for since the 2023 season. I think what's worth noting is this is kind of another situation where when you talk Tennessee, we said everyone wants to talk about Nico or James Pierce Jr. And hey, 2 really good football players. We think James Pierce Jr. is probably going to go in the top 10 of the NFL draft. That being said, what makes this Tennessee front 7 one of the better units in the SEC, it's not just a one-trick pony. They got so many different guys that can do so many different things. It's a talented unit and the top end, but it's also really deep. And you talk about a guy that really could break out and be that second best edge rusher for this Tennessee program. I think you're looking at one in Joshua Josephs here.
He's an interesting one because I think his ability to rush the passer is far greater than what I think he's shown on the film. I thought last year you started to see him emerge in the run game, be a little bit more disruptive, be impactful. You know he's going to play physical football for sure on that edge spot, but he's a guy I think they can definitely get another ounce of in terms of being a pass rusher. And I think if you get to pair him up with James Pierce a little more often, he can be more consistent, prove himself a little bit more. That's a really, really dangerous 1-2 punch. And I don't even want to pretend like Dominic Bailey or Tyra West are like guys who can't play or you don't want to be playing at the SEC level. I mean, those are 2 big physical defensive ends who you really like. I do think Josh Josephs offers them a little bit more versatility, a little bit more ability in the pass rush unit, and you know he's going to play the run. So he's a guy I think you're just kind of hoping it fills out his potential because you've seen some really good moments over the past 2 years from him.
Yeah, he was a guy that kind of similar to Ethan Davis, and coming out of high school, 210-pound edge rusher, you knew that there was going to be a little bit of an adjustment period in terms of putting on that weight and getting to that SEC physicality. Year 3 is normally when you see those kind of players put it together. Josh Josephs quietly, and it's a smaller sample size than a guy like Tyler Barron last year. He had an 18% pass rush win rate. I mean, Tyler Barron was at 16. The Joshua Josephs as a pure pass rusher has a ton of juice. I think one other guy that I would throw out in this conversation is true freshman Jordan Ross. There are a lot of different difference makers, not only on the edge, but on the inside of this Tennessee defensive line that really can provide some juice in the pass rush. Going back to, and this was kind of our hot take for Tennessee really all offseason. We'll kind of double down on it here. The linebacker play gets better for Tennessee heading into 2024. How can that be when you lose your top leading tacklers at the linebacker spot? Hey, Beasley was awesome. Elijah Herring was average at best. You know what I mean? He filled up the stat sheet, but wasn't really a difference maker.
He wasn't a guy who could play in space in the way you need to be able to play in space. Didn't have a ton of athleticism. Wasn't a great mover. And you just, again, you can stuff the stat sheet and make tackles, but there were a lot of plays that should have gone for 2 yards that went for 5, or should have gone for 3 and went for 10, just because he wasn't a great athlete at that linebacker spot for the SEC.
Didn't really work downhill that well. Was kind of a catcher at the linebacker position. You look at Arian Carter. This kid flashed as a freshman, and from what you're hearing in fall camp, he's getting back healthy, lost a little bit of weight, a little bit more juice in space. I think this kid could be an all-SEC linebacker in the 2024 season. And you kind of pair him up next to Pili. You got that veteran presence in the linebacker room, and then you go with a young cat that just can fly all over the football field. This is what Tennessee was looking for at that linebacker spot, kind of similar to how we talked about on the recruiting trail the other day. We need linebackers that can operate in space, that can do a lot of things, go sideline to sideline. Arian Carter is that kind of linebacker, something that you just kind of missed with Elijah Herring. I'm buying a lot of stock in this linebacker room for Tennessee, and Dill, we got to close it out with our guy. Obviously, as Michigan fans, we wish he was in Ann Arbor, but we're still fired. I mean, he was one of our favorite prospects in the 2024 cycle, true freshman Boo Carter, who sounds like he's come in and is going to play a lot at that star position for Tennessee in the 2024 season.
Yeah, and obviously with Jordan Thomas going down, you obviously had to have somebody step up and make it happen, and it sounds like Boo Carter was frankly right in that battle even before the injuries. So obviously you have a lot of confidence that he's going to come in and make it happen. But at the end of the day, I just think when we talk this Tennessee team, I think almost everyone knows a lot of whether they reach their potential, whether they go to the playoffs or are really competitive in the SEC, it's going to come down to the secondary making some jumps, because that's been the unit that, it's coming along. It's been better than when Josh Heupel first took it over, and better when Tim Banks first took it over, but it still has some wood to chop. And I think you just needed the talent in that room to kind of get up to snuff, if you will. You didn't have guys going pro out of that unit. Now you have a guy like Boo Carter, a guy like Ricky Gibson, and even obviously
Jermon McCoy.
Should have led with him, frankly, because he's probably the best corner they have. But you have some legit talents who I think can play a little bit more man, can be a little bit more aggressive with them. They don't need as much help. That, to me, is something I'm just going to be looking for. If they can almost change their defensive identity to moving from a bit of a bend don't break system to being a bit more, well, we're just going to stifle teams. You're not going to get a yard on us.
We said this, a kind of similar conversation that we just had with the linebacker spot. You look on Tennessee on paper and say, all right, how are they going to be in the secondary? They lose a lot of production, whether it's the NFL draft or transfer portal. I think we both look at the secondary and say, well, yeah, it's not as experienced. It's not as much proven production, but it's a heck of a lot more talented. This is the most talented Tennessee secondary we've seen. Yes, they're a little thin. Yes, they're a little inexperienced, but they're very talented. I think the ceiling for this Tennessee secondary is, quite frankly, extremely high. There's a little bit more unknown than you have with the front seven, but it's very talented. And Dill, I went back to the spring game for Boo Carter. I was already a massive fan of Boo Carter. When he committed to Tennessee, we said this kid was born to play that star position. The movement skills are insane. We kind of knew that. You go back to Boo Carter's high school film as we get an advertisement here. The movement skills are nuts, but the physicality he plays with as a true freshman, that's what's going to separate him and really allow him to play as a freshman. Dill, we're both really excited about this Tennessee team. Obviously, a lot of fun game predictions to get into as we roll into the season. We'll cut it there, though. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.